like to start the meeting of the Audit Committee. My name is Councillor Massey and I'm the Chair. I'd like to remind everyone present that this meeting is being recorded and will be uploaded onto the Council's website. Item 1, apologies for absence. Brian, have we received any apologies?
Yes, we have. We've had apologies from Councillor Johnson, from our co-opted member Charles Clark and from our Section 151 officer Dawn Calvert.
Thank you for that. Item 2, the minutes of the previous meeting. I was unable to attend that meeting, so I'm hoping some of the members that were present held on the 7th October 2025 can be approved. Does any member have any comments on the minutes? Councillor Raper.
On page 8, it says that I queried, Councillor Raper queried if officers had identified in records management areas that if the data was lost, it would be completely lost. And we were told that we would be given the information after the meeting. I didn't know if it had gone straight to the chair. No?
Don't recall it being sent to me. I had a similar question around Councillor Johnson had a thing about the extraordinary decisions being signed off as well. I don't know if that was circulated to him, but I can't ask him tonight. So do you remember the comment on those couple of inquiries? And Tinder, it's just on those couple of items.
I'm happy to comment. So is that can I just clarify that question on the records management information you were requesting?
What I was asking was, because a lot of stuff is now being saved digitally, are there any pieces of data that if they were lost, they would be lost completely to us, that may matter? Because I know on other committees I'm on, there are bits and pieces that are needed. And I don't mean keep it for 10 years or whatever. I mean, people need it to do their job. So that was the question.
Probably a couple of points on that. So absolutely, that's a fair question. So in terms of the information that should have been provided by management, I don't believe they have provided it, or as the head of internal audit, we haven't seen it. It's probably quite attuned to the records management report, which will be presented later today. I will follow up with management for you as the CFO wasn't able to make it today. What I would just add to it, however, is there's two steps here. Although yes, data will be stored digitally, the 2 points are due to GDPR, there's specific rules, so it can't be stored over a certain period of time unless it's absolutely needed. But the second part of that, the council do have backup servers and backup support. So if, for argument's sake, it became corrupt, there will be a way to recover it.
Thank you. I wasn't talking about keeping it a long time. People were using it. Thank you. I'm not quite sure what Councillor Johnson's question was, though.
Yeah, it was just about emergency decisions, I think, being signed off, and someone was going to come back to him, but I think we'll have to leave that one as he's not present today. Any other comments on that? The minutes? No. I move then that those minutes be approved as a correct record. Any disagree with that? No. Thank you. Item 3, items of urgent business. I have not agreed to any items of urgent business. Item 4, declarations of interest. Does anyone wish to declare a declaration of interest? No, thank you. Moving on to item 5, this is an external update progress report. Can I please ask John Chance and EY to present this item, please?
Thank you, Chair. The report that I've got here covers a couple of things. It covers an update on all of the...
It's probably best, Chair, we just move straight to EY to give an update next time.
Oh, I'm doing 6. Sorry. Okay.
Sorry, yes. Yes, so thank you, Chair. I think John will probably cover most of this in his item next, and he's included some bits in the covering report to his item as well. So we have, as John's report says, worked through some queries on the draft 24-25 statement of accounts, and the finance team have worked through these and provided an updated set of accounts to the committee tonight, including some of the amendments that we identified during that element of the audit. We have also produced a report which we've shared with you, Chair, and Dawn, which you're currently considering, and hopefully we'll be able to bring that to the next committee, which provides a status update on the position of our audits, and also some summary on the value for money reporting that we have been working on. So we have identified some potential significant weaknesses there on VFM, and hopefully we can bring that report to you once Councillor Massey and Dawn have reviewed it, because I know they've got some comments on it before we present it to the Audit Committee. But yeah, just to keep you appraised that we are performing some work. I have some audit team working at the minute. We're also working on some financial sustainability points around the council and investigating the medium-term financial plans from 23-24, 24-25, looking at the out-term reports as well, which will feed into our value for money reporting. We also have a team looking at the disclaimer of opinions, which we've mentioned for 23-24 and 24-25. As I mentioned at the last committee, we are getting ready for when BDO have concluded the prior year audits, 2021, 21-22 and 22-23, so that when they are complete, we are ready to go and we can provide those disclaimer audit opinions as quickly as possible following BDO's conclusion on the prior year audits that are still open. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very, very much. Any members have any comments or questions on this update? Councillor Arnold.
Thank you, Chair. It's around the BDO. I know we've said that it should come to a conclusion in February. I was just wanting an indication from officers of whether they still think that target is realistic and that is going to happen. And then on page 16 of the report, 4.2, just looking at the number of queries and questions that you had with the clarification on accounting treatment of 41 questions. I just wondered, are you completely satisfied with the answers that you got? And if maybe you could just give us like an idea of what kind of things it was.
Yeah, so I can take the second question first. I'll leave officers to respond on the BDO question. So we are still working through the responses from the council on these questions. We're aware they have made the changes to the accounts that we've requested, which they are presenting tonight. This is the first time we've fully looked at a set of Thurrock Council accounts. So we probably would expect to have a large number of questions when we come into any council because we're not familiar with their accounts. So there will be things just to clarify why the council has got certain accounting policies in place, why they may have presented a certain note or some certain financial figures in a certain way. So most of them are just clarification. But we did also identify a number of sort of casting differences where the tables didn't add up or cross-referencing between the notes within the statements were inconsistent. We do find those on all sets of accounts, so it's not something that is necessarily specific to Thurrock, and we have seen higher numbers of total questions on other sets of draft accounts as well. So yeah, we do pick up absolutely everything. We will review every number in a lot of detail, and even if the numbers are out by a small amount, we would flag that to the council as well. As it says in the note, in the paper from the finance team, there were no material issues that we identified from our review of the accounts. But just to remind the committee that that was a high-level review of the accounts, and we haven't performed any detailed testing within those statements. As we've said before, we're performing a fully disclaimed audit, so we won't perform any substantive procedures where we pick samples and look at transactions. This was just a high-level check of the draft financial statements for consistency, casting, and whether the accounting policies are in line with what we would expect. Hopefully that helps. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions from members? I've got one. So let's say we'll come back to BDO and the February date in a second, officers, but say it does happen, 15th of February, BDO done that part of it. How quickly then can EY move to go through this backlog?
Yeah, that's a good question, and one I think that was raised at the last committee, and as indicated before, if BDO are able to, I think we said by the end of the calendar year, if they were able to conclude, we would have been able to conclude by the backstop date on the 27th of February. We've performed all the procedures we need to. We just need to tidy up those procedures, see what BDO have reported. We would need to review their audit files for the latest year, make sure that our risks are consistent, that we haven't missed anything from the work that we've done, but we would be able to turn it around relatively quickly. We've done most of the work we need to now on the 23-24 statements from a disclaimer position, and as we've reported here, there's quite a lot of work that's already gone into the 24-25 statements from a disclaimer position. And in relation to value for money, we've provided you and Dawn with a report which substantively takes us through the value for money procedures we have performed. It would just need to be checking in with BDO that we haven't missed any risks, that they haven't identified anything that we need to follow on from, or of course if anything else happens in the interim period that we would need to pick up. But yeah, we would be able to turn it around relatively quickly. I would probably say a 2 to 3 month period from BDO concluding. We would be able to conclude unless we come across any other issues like they have with an objection. But as far as we're aware from the 23-24 and 24-25 draft accounts, there were no public objections to those accounts. So we wouldn't be in the same position as BDO for these statements. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. Would any Officer from Thurrock give an update on how BDO are doing in time frame wise, please?
So there has been some progress recently. Would be loath to say that I'm completely confident that we'll be able to complete it by the end of this calendar year. We have been in discussion with BDO this week, but we now need to follow that up and find out what their response is and what work they feel they need to do to be completed. Once we've got clarity over what steps they need to do, then we'll be able to get a clear idea about when we'll be able to complete the work and then pass it on to EY to complete their parts of the audit. So it's progressed, but it's still in a position where we don't have complete clarity over when things will be completed, I'm afraid.
As we're obviously getting closer and closer to February, say, and backstop dates and things like that, could I just communicate a regular update on that, maybe even weekly, if it's changing that quickly, or when there's a change, significant change?
Certainly.
There's no recommendations on this item, so unless any members have any more comments or questions. Yep. Our co-opted member, Jasdeep.
Just regarding the delay or potential delay, what is actually driving that? Is it the external auditors, or is it providing information to the external auditors? It just seems to be a reoccurring theme that it keeps getting pushed back.
So we did go out and get council opinion on the status of the objection. We've received that back, we've considered it, we've passed that on to BDO. We now need to go through and discuss with them what the next stages are. So there has been progress on that. It's actually just now working through what needs to be done in the next stages.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Any other comments or questions from members on this one? Thank you very much for the update there. Appreciate it. Thank you. Going on to item 6, this is audit update and resubmission of the unaudited statement of accounts 2024 to 2025. Can I please ask John Chance to present this item, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this report covers the backdrop which we've just looked at, so I won't necessarily dwell on that. We understand the reasons for the delays, and Dan from EY has given us a précis of where EY are with 23-24 and 24-25. So one of the things we've done is we've obviously considered all of the queries that the EY have raised on the 24-25 accounts, as he was saying, at a fairly high level, casting queries and various queries about application of policies and clarity on where some of the figures have come from. And culminating from that, we've got two boxes, points 4.2 and 4.1, and 4.2, covering all of those. So we've addressed all of the items. There's something like 92, and where we've made some superficial changes to the accounts, that's been done. Where we've needed to clarify positions with EY, that's been done, and all of the queries that they've had have been addressed. So rather than me talking you through all of those, because obviously there's quite a lot of them, I've produced an updated set of accounts, and the sorts of things we're talking about, sometimes syntax errors, typing errors, sometimes the wrong year, sometimes clarification of why a prior year figure has changed, sometimes just explanations of where a figure's come from. For example, we've given a bit more clarity about where the provisions, there's a provision for the insurance that the authority has, there's a provision for appeals against business rates, and we've given a bit more backdrop to that, and things like audit fees as well. We've clarified what the public sector audit appointments fee is within the table. So we've given a little bit more information to make things easier for the reader, for the lay person. And although there's no material changes, we felt it was the right thing to do because of the numbers of excuse me, changes we've made, is to republish these accounts. So Appendix 1 covers the full range of the changes, and if anybody's interested in any specifics, I can be clearer. But as EY said, and I will clarify, there's nothing material, and the main core statements remain unchanged. So therefore, it's really just some of the semantics around how the accounts knit together, which we're quite comfortable with, and in the absence of any formal feedback from EY, we're ready to go. So I was seeking approval from the committee to republish these accounts and reopen public inspection if everybody's happy with that approach, on the basis that there's no material changes. And one thing to point out, the group accounts are no longer valid because the subsidiary accounts, they've sold the assets in 23-24, and the traffic of transactions was immaterial. It was less than £50,000 across the two companies that the council runs, so they're winding down. So therefore, that was one of the big issues. There's no group accounts here, so it's single entity only, just the Thurrock Council General Fund and Housing Revenue Account. So I think that's really where we are. Happy to take any questions about the detail, the approach, and the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members have comments and questions on this item. Councillor Arnold.
Thank you, Chair. Sort of like based on what you just said there, I'm a little bit confused. On page 56 of the agenda, which is page 36 of your statement, note 3, the first bullet point, it says the council's interest in Thurrock Regeneration Limited is material to the council's overall financial position and therefore will be consolidated within the council's group accounts. As of the time of publication, the group of accounts are not finalised. But if I'm understanding you correctly, there are no other groups of accounts that are affecting the council's accounts, or is this affecting it? I suppose now I'm kind of wanting clarification there. And is that kind of saying, because I'm assuming that as it's Thurrock Regeneration Limited, we've got a council officer sitting on that council officers that have got to prepare those accounts are not preparing them in time for the council to be able to consolidate the accounts, which really concerns me because we've already got a delay of 5 years. What's going on there?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, the accounts are prepared and they are with BDO, or will be, for final audit, but they are not material. So what I will take away is I need to tweak that comment before we publish, because I probably missed that, or between me and the team, the accounts aren't material, the subsidiary accounts. So I will need to just vet my final version and make notes accordingly. It's come to light in the last few weeks. It's really trivial, the throughput. It's, like I say, less than 50 grand of costs have come through, so they're not material. So I'm glad you pointed that out. I'll happily make a change before we publish.
Thank you, Councillor. It's obviously about 130 odd pages of the actual. How can someone who just watched our first meeting where we put a set of accounts forward, and now they want to see the changes, what would be the easiest way for them to do that? Thank
Thank you, Chair. I would be happy to do another sort of précis of all the physical changes. Where we've given clarification, etc., that may not be essential, but I could actually give an update for the committee. That would be helpful. In fact, to be fair, there was an earlier iteration of this report that was going to raft it all out, but we felt that might take ages. And whilst on the one hand we're saying it's nothing material, on the other hand, clearly there's an element of curiosity, isn't there? So I'm happy to produce perhaps a summary which would refer you to the actual page and the actual change we've done. I think that would really clear things up, wouldn't it? I'd be happy to do that.
Yeah, I think that would be a really good idea. Thank you for that. Councillor Arnold?
Yeah, it would definitely clear it up, but it kind of, for me, that should be a standard thing in any report where we're getting amendments and changes, especially in something like statements of accounts. I think going forward, that should just be a given that will happen.
Thank you, Councillor. I concur. I guess, given that there was the materiality aspect was low, we didn't, but I'll sort it out. Thank you.
Councillor Raper?
Just further on that point, that it would have been really useful to have had something like that before we read the 330 pages. So perhaps in future, I know you're going to do it for now, but could we always have that sort of thing at the same time? Thank you. Thank you.
There is a number of recommendations. The majority of them are to note. So if everyone in the committee is happy, I'll take them on block. Found on page 14 of the pack, recommendations 2.1 down to 2.7. I'll read 2.7, the final one, but we'll be voting for them on block unless anyone disagrees. I delegate approval of the chair of the committee to sign the final unaudited statement of accounts for 2024-2025, incorporating any material changes required by the auditors by the backstop cut-off date of the 28th of February 2026. Are we all agreed on those 7 points of recommendation? Yeah, agreed. To the contrary? Thank you. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 7, risk management update. Can I please ask Tinder Chairs to present this item, please?
Thank you, Chair. So for the risk management update for this quarter, there's 3 appendices. So if you have the PDF, it's on page 135. If you have the pack, it's page 133 onwards, just to help. In essence, the first appendix, so I won't go through the front page report, but to summarize, the first page, which is appendix 1 that I'd refer you to, is an overall diagram of where you are across the council for directorate and corporate risks, what's been completed to date. So we, as you're aware from the last audit committee, the JCAD system, which is the risk management system across the council, is in full operation. It went through its first update across all directorates, where every directorate was asked to provide an update on all of their risks, make sure they're still appropriate, action plans are included, and this will be an iterative process every month. Online training was continued to be given, and although we haven't included it in there, as you can see in next steps, members and SLT training, we're currently planning that, and we have a early conversation just after the new year where we will come to members with potential dates and hopefully that they can attend. We will provide more than one date just to ensure that we have everyone. This training will be pushed out also to the senior leadership team, just to ensure that the flow of risk and understanding of risk is appropriate. So that was all I was going to mention on the first appendix. The second appendix is your risk strategy document. Now, every council should have a risk strategy document that is updated every year. It can be between 3 and 5 years as best practice. The council has historically done a 5-year risk strategy document. This has been updated this year for the next 5 years, so 2025 to 2029 inclusive, and will also be updated again in 2026. The key updates to that document have been included in your front page report. And the key things to point out, as I will assume it's read, is have been highlighted on section, apologies, on page 134 of the hard copy, which is the background to the report, which talks about risk culture, risk appetite, risk categories, and risk management action plan. I will pause there before I go to the corporate risk register to take any questions, if that's okay.
That's fine, thank you for that. In terms of training for risk, should all councillors be made available to all councillors, not just the audit committee? Just something to consider. I think it's considering where we've been on a journey as an authority, I think it would be sensible to at least, it can't force them to come, but at least make it available to all councillors. I don't know how the committee feel about that.
From my perspective, absolutely, that's not a problem. We can make it available to all councillors. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And you wanted to, before we go into risk management strategy, just deal with the first part of the report first, yeah?
So before we go to the corporate risk register, I thought if we deal up to the end of the management strategy.
Okay. No problems. Any members have comments or questions? Yep, Councillor Arnold.
Sorry, Chair. Page 134, recommendations. It says, for the reasons set out in this report, the Cabinet is recommended to. So I want to make sure that we've got the right set of recommendations before we kind of like get to that part. And then I do have a question sort of on page 36, and you were mentioning training there. And it's like, you know, I keep referring back to that bit on that's also on page 143. Council recognises legal responsibility to manage business risk, and yet here we are with the main risk. The big risk is failure of training for risk management, and you've just mentioned training there. I just wondered if it's something that should be highlighted more regularly and we get kind of timeline and an update on it, because this is the bit where I don't feel confident, and we should feel confident, because if we haven't got officers trained in risk management and an uptake from councillors, as Councillor Massey has said, then we're in trouble going forward. And we're already like several years into special measures where all of this risk management, we got into special measures for not having risk management, and here we are 3 years later still struggling to train staff. It just really does concern me a lot.
Thank you. So for the first question, that Cabinet, apology, that's a mistake. So it does go to this committee. It doesn't go to Cabinet. Let me rephrase that. It will go to Cabinet, but for information only. So we will correct that. That's just a small typo. In relation to risk management as general and training, absolutely fair point. So as you're aware, from when I came here in February, I completely agreed with your position that there's been a significant gap in the risk training, risk management, risk processes across the council. To provide some assurance, since then, from February now to where we are in December, we have managed to provide training across the directorates, which is a huge undertaking for, in essence, a risk team of 2. So myself and my risk manager. We will continue providing that, and we will also now expand that in January to members as yourself, so you can hopefully be assured that you can challenge risk appropriately to SLT, to anyone you feel appropriately when you deep dive into risks going into the new year. We are doing a corporate governance internal audit report, and as part of that, one of the areas is risk being challenged appropriately from members such as yourself, and that will be one of the recommendations that you'll be able to see of how the flow of information will be feeding in and the timelines to ensure that everybody is adequately trained. Unfortunately, because we started from such a very basic point, it's been a challenge to get to this point. However, there is significant progress and recognition of that, so hopefully it will continue.
Councillor Raper.
Thank you. I think you've just answered my questions, so thank you.
Got a quick question about JCAD. So, in terms of where does the input come from? Is it sort of from directorates, or is it we have to go through the audit team? How's that work? How's the information get into JCAD?
Sure. So the way it's been set up is every directorate has their own, in essence, front sheet of, every directorate has their own risk register. Now, that means that they are able to access it and update it via what we call risk champions. So every director also has more than one risk champion who have been trained. So for each month, we ask the director to review it, and the risk champion will be able to edit it, which is then re-reviewed by the director of that directorate. And where risks are to be escalated to the corporate risk register, these are flagged and then considered at the senior leadership team meetings, which will ultimately be presented to yourselves once a quarter in the corporate risk register. And that's an up and downward process.
And we've got backups for the risk champions as well, haven't we? Yeah, good.
Yes.
Just checking. Councillor Arnold?
How do you feel about the risk of complacency within that system of those weekly checks and it becoming, and not really being fully checked? How much do you think that is a risk, and what would you do to sort of combat that? What places will you have in place as an internal auditor on that system to overcome complacency?
Sure. So because we're at the early stages, complacency probably hasn't quite kicked in. However, absolutely, it will always be a risk as an iterative process. To combat that, what we've specifically done is ensure every risk has action plans or action dates where it's reducing the risk level of every specific risk. Now, what that will do is it will mean that people will be able to challenge it. Once that's done, if it hasn't changed within a 3-month period, the question is, why have you got an action plan that's not changing or not improving or not considering the risk in a different way? And that's automatically flagged on the system. And then we would raise that with the director of the directorate to understand why. And if we, as myself as a head of risk and a part of the internal audit team, feel there's a staticness around that area, we would then go and do an internal audit review as it raises the risk profile of that area.
Comments and questions from members on this one? I was just going to ask one. There's on page 13 of the strategy, page 155 of the report pack. It's got some further guidance and support about an email address and things like that. I mean, how often has that been used and accessed by officers?
So the risk management process, that email address specifically is flagged for any reports that go to yourselves or go to Cabinet, because we request that all reports are considered in the tables that you see for the risks around that report and the information coming out. In terms of how it's used elsewhere, we receive a significant number of emails where there's questions about potential new risks that might be added, or people just generally asking if they feel like they've got a gap or want to consider the plans they've put in place, if they're adequate or not.
Excellent. So that becomes like a place to keep a track and log all those different risks and changes in them. Excellent. Good.
Yes, absolutely.
Any other questions on this part before we go into the corporate risk register? Over to the corporate risk register then.
Thank you, Chair. The corporate risk register, as was flagged last quarter, will be reviewed every quarter by the senior leadership team and presented to the audit committee whether it's updated or anything's changed or not. For this quarter, there have been some updates, but the key one to flag is the final risk, which was the local plan, which is a new risk on your corporate risk register. It was considered by the senior leadership team earlier last month, and they felt because of the changing environment, it's appropriate to put it as a corporate risk. We ask that the audit committee consider the register as a whole, and if there's any questions on it that they would like to ask management, I can take them back, or if I could answer them, I would be happy to. But I wasn't going to go through each risk or anything at this point.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessary to go through each one. I did try and get this blown up a bit, but I think something's been lost in translation because it's the same size but on a bigger bit of paper. So still using like the magnifying glass on my phone to read it. So yeah, could you, so you talk me through the process of how the local plan is now on this risk register. How did it go?
Absolutely. So we actually have the director of place who flagged it as a significant risk. As part of that process, she discussed it with my risk manager, and then we had a conversation. We asked that it was presented at the senior leadership team over why it's a corporate risk and not just a directorate risk. They had a discussion over it and actually the impact it would have on the council. Now, as part of the risk management strategy, you've probably noted there's a couple of areas you consider. So if it's a significant financial impact, political impact, there's a few other areas. If it meets a certain number of criteria, although these are subjective, then the senior leadership team are able to say, yes, it's appropriate to go on the corporate risk register. And as they agreed it was to do so, we have now moved it to the corporate risk register.
Thank you. Because it's a new risk, it's quite interesting to see how it finds itself on here. And yeah, so any comments or questions from members before on this one, on the corporate risk register? Anything? No? Councillor Arnold, looks like you've got something.
A comment really of like, you know, it's a new line. I think we need to wait and see it develop a little bit and have a bit more meat on the bones to look at.
I think the other one that stood out for me on this was homelessness, on the first page. And just, yeah, it's obviously that's quite a fast-moving picture, probably, and changing, updating all the time. How regularly are we going to have this? Make sure this gets updated when it comes to things like homelessness.
In relation to the risk register, so members will see it every quarter. However, one of the things, as we discussed in the previous audit committees, it's worth whether members want to do a deep dive every so often into a specific risk. If you feel this is a key area, then maybe for the March committee or the committee after that, have a deep dive into the risk and understand the basis behind the action plans behind the risk and anything else you'd wish to question.
No, thank you for that. Any other comments or questions on this? Councillor Panjala.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jess, for the report. Page number 158, under the table legal and compliance, the risk appetite level showing adverse. Can you please explain me in detail what is that one?
Apologies, was that page 158?
Yeah. The council adopt an adverse stance for legal and compliance risks.
Absolutely. I think so. That table demonstrates the council, so senior leadership teams' consideration of how they feel each of those categories and what their risk level or their risk appetite will be against them. So when it's adverse, it basically means that the council will try to take no risks. I appreciate there's always an inherent risk, but they will aim to take no risks when considering safeguarding or safety of local people or members or anyone else in the community.
Thank you, Jess. Thank you, Chair.
And a lot of this is around September 26. A lot of the goals that are mentioned in here. How are we doing meeting those deadlines?
So from my point of view, as we updated this in September this year, the risk strategy that I inherited, I felt wasn't detailed or appropriate enough to give us enough assurance. So in terms of how we're going to meet on September 26th, the senior leadership team are comfortable with the strategy and they've reviewed it. So the perfect world, it would be, yes, we will meet them. If there are any deviations from that, they'll be flagged earlier than September 26th because it would be brought to members' attention.
On page 153, it says about it's not a legal requirement, but it's best practice for an independent peer review of the council's risk management arrangements. Was that been done on this document?
Not yet. No, so this is the first iteration of a document that's probably meeting the risk management requirements at the council in the last couple of years, but happy for next year's one to include that if that's helpful.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you for that. I mean, it said every 3 years, so I didn't know if it was going to be in 3 years' time, but if it's next year, that's great. Any other comments or questions? Justip?
More just a point to note, I've seen a big improvement in the risk register and the information that's coming through, and I think it's quite positive to see something added to the corporate risk register as well. So that does give me more confidence.
Did you want to come back on that, or just?
Thank you.
It's always nice to get a compliment, isn't it? So there you, Councillor Raper.
Thank you. I was just going to ask that there's mention of quite a few registers that have been begun. Are they on track? Are they happening?
Yes, so anything that's been included in this report is now on track to give members a bit more clarity as well. There's 3 levels of risk registers that you have. You have your corporate risk register, which you see the detail of. You have directorate risk registers, which go across each directorate, and then you have the risk registers which are just below that they don't have to be on the JCAD system, but each director will have them because there are, in essence, day-to-day operational risks. So we would call them an operational risk register, but that term can fluctuate slightly, hence why we don't like to talk about that one too much.
Any other comments or questions? No. The recommendations are reasonably short, so I'll go through them now. So recommendation 1.1, note the progress on the overall risk management of the council and raise any areas we'd like to focus on. I think we've done that. I think we agreed. Agreed, yeah. 1.2, consider the updated risk management strategy 2025 to 2029 and confirm it's appropriate for the period identified. We agreed. Agreed. 1.3, consider whether the corporate risk register is appropriate for the council and the environment it operates in. Are we agreed on that? Thank you. On to item 8 on the agenda. Please ask Santinder to introduce the report. It's the internal audit update.
Thank you, Chair. So if I could ask everyone to go to page 175 on the pack, or 177 if you have the PDF. It's a high-level update of where we are with the audit plan for the year. I won't go through all of it, but just to highlight a few key points. There are 7 reports which we are presenting to this audit committee. There are 4 audits which we've deferred to 26-27, and the basis of those was resource capacity from management. However, we've included 3 new audits for this year based on the risk assessments that we are continually doing, and those have been included on page 176, as you can see in deferred, and that will give you a high-level view. In terms of management actions and recommendations, currently there are no actions that are overdue, and to flag, there was, for the records management report, as I'm sure you've noted, some cases where management did not provide a date of responding to actions, so we do not classify these as overdue or outstanding. I'll just pause there for a moment if there's any questions before I start going to each report.
Any initial questions before we start going through the appendixes? Councillor Arnold.
Yeah, sorry, on the front page of that, where it says management have not responded with timelines in relation to all recommendations in the records management report. Hence, where this is the case, these are excluded from the below numbers and have not been classified as overdue or outstanding. Kind of seems bad to me that we have got audits and risks and management of them not timelined and not so that you don't know if they're overdue. It's kind of, it doesn't feel transparent for me. I don't know how many there are like that because they're being excluded. And then I don't know if they're being managed, how they're being managed, if they're going to get a timeline. How, if you're saying that because they haven't got a date that they're not considered as overdue, are they years old? Are they weeks old? What?
And absolutely, that's a fair challenge. So that report is a report that's will be presented to the audit committee now. So from the clear point that we made was any reports from my tenure, from when I started, where management do not provide due dates or responses, these are flagged to members, and you are able to challenge management over why there are no due dates or why responses were not provided, a duty for me is to report that, because management said we're not comfortable providing that information, and then members can challenge management, and then they can take those back and respond appropriately as necessary. So we will go through that report, and any questions you have at that point, I will take note of, because unfortunately Dawn was unable to make it today, and then they will come back to you.
Councillor Arnold?
I guess really it's more a question for you, Chair, in that shouldn't it be that there's a given challenge for anything that doesn't have a date on it from us? It shouldn't be us having to say to you to go back to a manager to say they're challenging the fact that there's not a date because you're not comfortable in giving one. Come here, give us an explanation as to why there is no date for us to understand further. But I would say it's a given that there should be dates, otherwise what are we doing?
Yeah, I've highlighted so many sections where I think, well, why isn't there a date there, or I don't think that date's realistic and things. I think what we can do as a committee is escalate this. If there's anything in particular that we want a director to look at, we can either escalate it to come back to an audit committee with a written report, or to, if it's the easier route and it's quicker maybe and it's urgent, go to a scrutiny committee for that directorate and have it a written update there as well. So that's the options we have available to us. It would just be for us as a committee, all of them, or is there particular ones? No, all of them. That's what I think, yeah. So what we want to see then is target dates around all of these, every single one. And that's as a committee what we'd like to take forward. And for reasons for doing so, we'd invite the directors or assistant directors, SLT, to give a written update into what progress they're making around these different areas that the audit has picked up. Councillor Arnold, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, just as a comment, without that, we're almost tying your hands behind your back to do your job, because you've got no end game to say, right, I can audit this now, and yeah, we're okay, and therefore manage our risk. I don't see how we can be doing this without timelines.
Absolutely. I mean, from my point of view, to ensure that I remained independent, I can only ask the question of management to provide that information. If they decide not to provide that information, then I must report that they have not provided that information. So, yes, to that point, it's up to...
If we can pick that up at our next meeting, Tinder, and we'll discuss how we can take that forward before having to wait till March to get something going. So, thank you for that, Councillor Arnold. I'm sure there's going to be quite a few on this. What I'd like to do, just to keep it organised, is go through anything overall, and then we'll go through the appendixes one by one and see the questions around what come out of those. We've only got a limited number of officers for some, but we'll see how we get on. So before we go into the homelessness and temporary accommodation, is there any other general questions or comments regarding the update? Looks like we're going into the home. Oh, Councillor Panjala.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you just for the detailed report, and like a very crystal clear you have mentioned in the recommendations. Page number 176, we can see that there are many recommendations. Most of them are completed, still showing that limited assurance and reasonable assurance, which is highlighted in red, high recommendations. So what assurance we can expect from this, we can expect audit committee from the SLT team?
Can I just clarify? So are you asking, from the limit assurance and reasonable assurance reports that you're receiving, what assurance do you as members feel you are gaining in terms of the process and controls at the council?
Yeah, you have recommended, but with the limited assurance and reasonable assurances you have mentioned in that one. So how can we move forward those recommendations?
Absolutely.
I want to know that.
So the limited assurance, so where we give a limited assurance, that's on the overall assessment of that piece of work that we've completed. And we will provide recommendations in relation to those, which are ranked high, medium, and low. We would expect management to then go away, provide those target dates, add processes, controls in place to demonstrate that those controls and processes have been improved. In a year, 2 years' time, we would go back and look at it as well after, and we'd also look at it at the target date. That will then hopefully mean, so for example, expenses gave you limited assurance. It would hopefully mean that next time we look at it, you might be at reasonable assurance because we don't find the same issues. In terms of what assurance members get, it shows you how the internal audit team feel that area is operating for that specific part of the function. You've got to understand some of these are very, very big areas. So payroll could be a huge area, but we only look at one small part of it. But that's the assurance. At this point in time, we're saying for that area and that specific part of it, we can only provide you with limited assurance. And on each of the reports, we give a little bit of a snippet, of what limited assurance means. So in essence, that's if you do not fix certain issues, there could be material error. And there's 4 ranks of those, but I can go through those in more detail in one of the reports if it's helpful.
Thank you, Jess. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any other before we go on to the first appendix? No? So if we go on to the first one, homelessness and temporary accommodation, would you like to do a bit of an intro on these? Yep.
Thank you, Chair. So before I go into this one, just to flag, I will assume all reports are read, so I won't go into each of the recommendations, but happy to answer any questions. The key thing to point out for homelessness is it's a very broad area. There's a significant amount of different functions that go on as part of the department. So we have looked at a very specific part of that department, and we've looked at things such as the processes and controls in relation to the strategy, how they're assessed, is there a workflow system for where people are assessed and they're processed through the council system, what is the training in place, and is there regular performance and monitoring processes. We have provided a limited assurance, so that's the second lowest that we can provide out of the 4 ratings that we give. That's due to a significant number of high recommendations and 4 medium recommendations. There are some strengths, as you can see, but I will pause at this point and happy to take any questions. And also, Claire from Place Directorate has kindly attended the committee and is also able to take questions with her colleague Anthony.
Thank you. Just before I open up to comments and questions on this, so did you say earlier that all of the dates under the responsible owner and completion date, all of the dates have all been stuck to the ones that are in the past from today? So if I was to say like the very first one, October 2025, was that done on time?
Yes, correct. So we are happy that currently there are no overdue recommendations in any of these reports.
That's just stopped me asking about 16 different questions, so that's good to hear. Yeah, open up to comments and questions from members. Councillor Arnold.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, page 84. The last paragraph under capacity constraints, it says there are 496 cases at relief duty status exceeding 56 days, which have not been fully investigated to see if a main duty was owed. So I kind of like, it worries me that people are sitting around for 56 days waiting to see whether there's anything that's got to be done to help them, rather than them, so they're sitting there waiting for help. So I kind of need a bit of explanation and clarification around that, because I probably don't understand the process enough to take that. And then it says under recommendations, consider if case referrals from departments like safeguarding and tenancy management should be processed within the homeless team or redirected elsewhere. Is this 496 cases? Are they waiting to decide where they should be processed by which service? So what are we kind of saying there?
Is that working? Yeah. So I'll go back a bit in the journey. So when someone first approaches the service, they get that initial assessment to kind of look at what route they're going to take in the homelessness journey. The 3 main routes are looking at prevention, so what we can do to prevent them ever needing to go into kind of temporary accommodation. What relief could we potentially give? So how could we almost mediate their current circumstances so they can stay there. So that relief could be kind of payments towards their rent or their bills. Or it's looked at, actually, we obviously that's the preference for all parties to go those two routes for a number of reasons, but the third route is looking at them putting them then into TA. So when we say main duty, it's one of those three routes that they're going into, so accepting main duty. Sorry, there was a second part, but I was so busy looking at the first part.
Yeah, so we're saying that people are waiting in excess of 56 days to get that initial assessment there of which route. Is that what that is telling me? Because that is really worrying that there are nearly 500 people waiting more than 2 months to get some indication of which route they're going to be able to take. If I'm reading that correctly? Is that clarification? And the other bit, well, actually, no, that follows in with that. So that was the second part, I suppose, yes.
So unfortunately, historically, yes, that is the case. What obviously you guys might not be aware of in terms of the journey that service is going at, is going through an improvement transformation journey. So in parallel to the audit report, there's been a deep dive review of that service. And there's going to be a cabinet report going in February. So as much as there's recommendations and actions on this, there's a separate deep dive review that's taken place that has pulled together all of those findings in the deep dive review, obviously the actions or the recommendations in the audit report, to come up with a comprehensive improvement plan, which naturally what's coming up in the recommendations is not going to address the 56 days, but what's in within that improvement plan. And that journey's already started, and we're already starting to see improvements in the kind of the service that's given.
So I appreciate that a deep dive is being done, but at what point does this get flagged as being a major concern, that we have got to 500 people waiting more than 2 months before we've got into the deep dive situation? In fact, it's quite disconcerting sitting here that people are waiting that length of time. So should there be flags and alarm bells ringing before those stages? What's not been in place? Am I missing something here?
Just for clarity, Councillor Arnold, it doesn't mean that we've got 500 people waiting for any type of intervention whatsoever. So we've not got 500 people that are homeless out on the streets. They're in some form of intervention, but we haven't processed them through the service or through the... So that we haven't got 500 people waiting to be assessed.
Okay,
what we've done is actually put them in temporary accommodation without actually demonstrating that they should be there in the first place. So it's actually the other extreme.
Right, okay.
Which has led to an increase in costs, which is now what we need to mitigate.
Okay, I get it now. That makes me feel better, because I was thinking that these... Yeah, okay.
I think it's a real tricky one. Homelessness has been something that's been on every council's radar lately, and it's something that we're still coming down the line, I think, from the back end of the pandemic and things like that. There is a lot of risk involved in it as well. As you look through, pretty much it's red, pretty much on every single page. And again, there's quite a lot of things that are set for sort of March 2026, which is not that far away now. I just wondered how, like things like, there was a thing on the capacity where we were going to train officers to clear the backlog and introduce regular casework supervision. Is there just an update on how we're doing on that between September and obviously March when it's due to be completed?
Thank you. Agreement was to recruit to 4 backlog officers. Obviously, step one's identifying what we're constituting as the backlog. So those officers are in place, and as part of the improvement plan, the target is to have that backlog tackled by the end of February.
That's good to hear. Thank you for that. And the draft service level agreement, for the number 6, the service level agreement with landlords. It seems like a real no-brainer to have something like that, to be able to sort of like keep a consistent level of service. So has that gone out now? Because the date was December 2025. Is it going to be a nice little Christmas present for a few landlords?
So the service agreement's been drafted. Our hesitation with moving forward with it at the moment, and the kind of ongoing conversations, is that ideally we want to reduce the number of TA in nightly lets. And the initial journey we're on in terms of that improvement plan has seen a net reduction in TA for the first time in 3 years. So we're just hesitating with moving forward with that, because our ultimate goal is to have that number down to, I won't say the number out loud right now, but to get that down by the end of March 27, which would mean going into a service level agreement at the moment might not be the best thing to do, because actually the chances are we won't have anyone in those landlords' properties at that point. We're just not sure at the moment, so just keep an eye on the data. We've drafted the agreement. They're just hesitating until we've got kind of all the full picture of what to do.
Thank you. So that'd be an example of a risk being de-escalated, I suppose, in terms of the system. Thank you for that. It's a good example to see it out in the wild, so to speak. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Manoir.
Well, thank you, Chair. I always have a problem with the mics, or someone else having a problem with the mics. But I think I was in another committee meeting and Claire presented a deep dive on the homelessness issue which we have in the borough, which was really useful. And I think through looking at this report, obviously there's a lot of red, which isn't great. But through understanding the deep dive and the reasons that are kind of behind such high levels and, like, I guess you could say, failures in the service, I am hopeful that it's going to improve. And you said you have a target for when you want things to eventually kind of move out of this sort of area. I was wondering, with the recent flooding of Brisbane House and a lot of residents that have been put in temporary accommodation now, in terms of the risk register, when will we see what's happened there reflected in this report, and is that going to impact the improvement which we'll be able to measure, like, going forward as a result of that emergency kind of situation?
We've been extremely lucky, Councillor Manoir, with the Brisbane House situation, that we had a number of landlords that weren't already on our books come forward in response to a call out to landlords. So actually it hasn't impacted our figures whatsoever, and we've still managed to maintain a reduction in figures. So we've seen more landlords come forward as a result of the Brisbane House emergency, and potentially may stay on our books, although eventually want to move out of nightly lets. But that hasn't actually had any impact whatsoever on the situation, which we've been really lucky.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions on this particular appendix before we go on to the next one? Thank you, Cliff. Oh, Councillor Panjala.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. I have page number 180 under the areas for improvement. Page number 180. Areas for improvement, bullet point number 3. The admin assistant has been working long hours to ensure all work is completed. Concerns was raised about this in March 2025, but no action has been taken to try to resolve its recommendations. And also I have point number 4. Key documents such as suitability assessment, property photos, and signed agreements are often missing on Jigsaw. Additionally, case status updates are inconsistently applied. So, we have already mentioned in the report that we have a less capacity of staff working over extra hours, and after their recommendations we could not able to take action. I don't know where it's having a delay to take action, in which level. And Also, important key documents are missing, like agreement documents on the jigsaw. So how we going to able to make improvement for those from your side? You have any action plan? Thank you.
Thank you. So in terms of the admin assistant, that particular person in the role at the time has moved and someone else has come in. But as part of the improvement journey, we're mapping out all of the processes across the board, and that included what they were doing, which was mainly around finance. And we've been able to streamline what they do, which means that they're working to their normal hours. In terms of the other part around Jigsaw, so Jigsaw for everyone is the system that homelessness use for case management. We're on a bit of a journey with that system as well, because it's not doing what we want it to do, in terms of there's 700 fields, but only 40 of them are mandatory, for example. So we're on that journey at the moment to configure that system in a way that works for us. But that obviously goes alongside having proper processes in place that staff are aware of, which we've done, so they're using it effectively and properly. And also understand the impact of what they do and don't do with the system, which has really helped.
Thank you, Officer, for your clarification. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, I know we briefly touched on the training element on my last question, because this is obviously a report from September. Is there anything else that we need to be aware of that's de-escalated or escalated that stands out in the report? Bringing it up to December rather than, you know, the progress you've made since September.
In terms of updates of what's kind of happened?
Yeah, so there have been material changes in terms of, like, we talked about the risk that was de-escalated. Has there been anything else like that that's changed since September?
So I mentioned about obviously the improvement plan. That covers a lot more than just what this report does. But what that does is set out the clear timelines. But in terms of what's been done since, that actually reflects on the report. So in terms of the capacity, kind of the commentary I gave around the backlog team, once that backlog's kind of dealt with, we can look at aligning kind of the right cases to the right people. It's really challenging at the moment when you've got a backlog as well as BAU. So the focus is really on sorting out that backlog, so we can then get officers to manageable levels. There's been a lot of work, and again, these are on the action plan around the rent arrears. So that number now, I'm going to pluck it out of my head a little bit, but it's down to around 91, and that work's ongoing. One of the recommendations around bidding for permanent accommodation. So we've absolutely got that technology available to us, but our current allocation policy doesn't support the use of auto bidding. So in order to introduce it, we'd need to kind of relook at our allocation policy, which is being done. The one at the end around processes, so what we've been able to do is map out every single core line process, and that isn't just kind of map out on a flip chart paper, that is to draw it out. And then obviously that's enabled us to ensure everyone's on the right page in terms of what the process is, but it gives us a really good stand-in to look at what could be improved. So that's been invaluable with our improvement journey.
Thank you for that. That answered my question perfectly. And I think that was really useful, that process, mapping them all out. It really, gets a bit of clarity around it and going forward. So that's really good to hear. Any other comments or questions on this particular appendix from members? No. Oh, this one. Yes, Councillor Peck.
Just on page 187, number 4, workflow. Has that action been carried out? Are regular reviews now happening?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any further questions? No. Claire?
Can I just add in something? So what I've found in, so what I've had the deep dive review has found for us is that these have significantly changed the council's understanding of the root causes of homelessness pressures, particularly around assessments, prevention, TA controls, data quality and governance. I think all too often we were sitting there accepting that demand is increasing, but what we found on balance is we weren't doing the work around prevention, we weren't putting those other measures in place, we weren't looking at data. So whilst we can see there's a number of items in red. We've now baselined this service and we are on an improvement journey. We are confident now that we are already seeing changes and improvements in the service, but also in the service that customers are receiving from us as a local authority.
It's good to hear. It's audit working as intended. It's yeah, absolutely perfect. Brilliant. I mean, we move on to the next one. Let me get that clear. It's demand management for children's services on page 199 of the reports pack.
Thank you, Chair. So happy to report, I believe this is, I think the second maybe report that I'm providing which has reasonable assurance for this year, and there's no high recommendations, so generally a really well-led area. So demand management for children's services, we've added a little bit of a background scope there for yourselves. In essence, it's the council's duty to look after children and carers up to a certain age. I won't go through the report, but I just want to flag there was no high priority recommendations, 5 medium and no low. So overall, an area of the council that's run quite well, and they did receive an outstanding Ofsted review in September 2024. So this does reflect that quite well to demonstrate there hasn't been any significant drop-off in the performance of their area.
Thank you for that. I think I'll just say this now and it will go for all of the reports. Any questions that are not about the actual audit but more about deeper down in that service, if we can request a written response to the members of any questions that can't be answered here tonight, that'd be great to note those. Thank you. And on that note, any comments or questions on this particular appendix? Councillor Arnold?
Not a question, it's a comment of, I'm always very proud of our children's services. I think they do an amazing job, and I'm not surprised where they are, and I don't have a question for them, no.
Yeah, I'd like to echo that. It's nice to see something that's not all red as well, and it's really nice to see that. And we know because Ofsted have obviously done the inspections and things as well, so it's good to see a service that's working, and this is just making sure that service is being maintained at the right level, which is encouraging to see, because there's not many more important than children's services. So, any other comments or questions on this item? Councillor Raper?
Thank you. On page 209, there's a comment about, as part of the review, the new sufficiency strategy, we also noted that there was no section on governance and monitoring, as there had been previously. Is that going to change, or is there something, what's the reason behind it? Thank you.
So I will raise that and take that back to management, because that'll be a question for them to answer.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think anyone that's not here tonight will have to either get a question and a written answer on those. It was quite handy having the Director Claire here tonight, who could answer some of those questions straight off the bat. Helen?
Councillor, I may be able to assist somewhat on some of the governance arrangements, because there's reference to committees. And we know, obviously, this year we have a new, we've split the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, so there are 4 Overview and Scrutiny Committees, with one specifically focusing on children's, and we also have the Corporate Parenting Committee as well. So to give that assurance around, I know it wasn't referenced in the information that the internal audit looked at, there are committees that specifically deal with issues that are affecting children's services.
Thank you. I'm actually on children's ONS, so...
Excellent, thank you. Any other comments and questions in relation to this appendix? No? Okay, thank you for that. We'll move on to the next appendix, which is contract management, found on page 213 of the report pack.
Thank you, Chair. So contract management for the council is significant. There's thousands of contracts. This report isn't there looking at every single contract or looking at the processes for every single contract. When we do look at specific areas, we try to focus on the directorate. So if it's for place, we would focus on the contracts in place specifically. This is generally to assess the effectiveness of managing contracts as a whole and how the procurement service team maintain the contracts register and flag potential changes to contracts to the directorates and so on. Limited assurance has been provided on this report. It was a high-level review where we focused on this Tier 1 and Tier 2 contracts. And just to give a bit of context, you have Tier 1, which are your critical, high-value, high-risk contracts. And then Tier 2 would be medium, and Tier 3 would be below. I think it's Tier 3 to Tier 4. That's all I was going to say on this, but happy to take questions and take any questions back to management if there's anything specific.
Thank you for that, Mayor. I'm going to start by saying there's one of the one on training and guidance, number one, area identified. And it's got obviously a completion date of September 26. I don't know if it seems like too far away. I mean, that would have been obviously 12 months away from the date. It seemed like a very, if it's that high risk rating, why are we waiting a year to complete it? Some of them, I'm going to come across this a bit of a theme on some of them. I think some of them I'd be much more comfortable to see either break the goal down a little bit and make it into smaller chunks to move towards the overall goal, or to just have a better plan to see how we're going to get that, why it's going to take a year. That's my first initial comment.
If I could just answer that. So my understanding is it's that specific recommendation is tied into the roadmap and the transformation plan. However, your follow-up point on the breakdown of the stages may be helpful to include that as part of management responses. So I will take that back as a question to management to provide.
No, thank you for that. It's just because it's literally a 12-month gap, and we're not going to know any progress on it until we're doing the next review in September, the year after. And yeah, similar thing with the continuity plans. I mean, it's such a big thing. We've seen what's happened when we had the building flooding over there. We've had pandemics. We've had all sorts. And I think we looked at business continuity and audit before, and we've all agreed that it's a really important factor of local authority. And I think, yeah, again, it's 2026 September, end of September. I think it'd be nice to know a bit more before we sort of, like I say, I think it's reset and a new report is done. So along the same sort of lines as that, really. But it's good to see that contract extensions is completed. I was quite pleased with that. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Arnold.
Well, unless you could reassure me otherwise, because I'm reading it wrongly, I'm pretty appalled. Page 217 and the percentages there. It's kind of telling me that we've got people managing contracts for hundreds of thousands of pounds with no contract management training. And we've got a quarter of the staff have not passed the efficiency course. We've got a third of staff that have not passed or withdrawn from an effective commissioning course. We've got more than 50% that, in the next paragraph, saying that they're not appearing on training records, so you don't even know whether they've been trained or not. Staff saying they weren't aware that there was commissioning training. Why have we got people that aren't trained in commissioning or contract management managing contracts as huge as the council contracts?
Once again, it'll be a question to take to management. However, just to add some context into it, so this was specific on against training records. And that doesn't mean those people haven't been trained at all, or they haven't learnt through years of experience. However, when we analyse it against the information available, so in this case it will be training records, those were the issues identified.
So sorry, that says to me there's a piece of work to be done to bring back to this audit committee so that we understand who is trained, who isn't trained, and to give us that confidence around this. Would that be accurate?
Yes, I can ask management to provide you with that information or what information they held in that regard.
I've got the feeling we might need to keep a log of all these questions, but if they can be distributed to the whole of the audit committee, please, and that'd be really useful rather than So everyone has got the answers to what we're raising tonight. Yeah, I mean, some of those numbers are quite shocking, Councillor Arnold, aren't they? You just, yeah. So it'd be really useful to see if it's just, people not filling out the training form correctly, and if things being logged as they should be.
Yes, certainly there's a difference between there not being a training record and people not being trained. I get that, but at the moment I don't know which it is.
Councillor Raper?
Just further on that point, this brings up something that I've raised before, that the fact that the training records aren't correct is perhaps casting light on the fact that our line management system may not be as effective as it might be. And I've asked before, is it that perhaps managers, middle managers and so on simply haven't got the capacity or have had the training themselves to be able to do that? Because really and truly, keeping a record of something shouldn't be difficult, really. Thank you.
I think that we'll take that back to management on that. And then, is there any other comments or questions on that particular one? Yep.
Probably a general question. Do you receive much information or queries back from the distribution list when these reports go out, or does it just become another email that's filed?
It varies. So and rightly so. So when this goes, so this report, before it's sent across the distribution list, goes to the senior leadership team, which I will attend and present the report to, and rightly so, they challenge it with relevant questions, and also request that whoever the sponsor is of the report, as you have on the front page, attend that meeting so they can also deep dive into anything they wish to before it's sent across to yourselves. And that doesn't mean anything changes in the report unless I independently feel it should change the report to maintain accuracy. In terms of when it goes for distribution list, I do receive some questions, but as you can probably guess, it depends on the area. So certain areas have a bigger raising questions than others.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Any other comments or questions on this particular appendix? No, thank you. Moving on to payroll.
Thank you, Chair. Payroll, so this, just to clarify, this is the payroll function and the system of Oracle, the processes that go through that system. So we're talking very specific to the legislative requirements, PAYE, national insurance contributions, and those areas. This is not to do with expenses or the other areas of payroll. As you imagine, payroll is a complex area. We have raised 3 recommendations with reasonable assurance. There hasn't been any significant issues apart from what I flagged, and management have been quite active to resolve the issues that we've raised.
Thank you. It's nice to see, because all the dates on this one we're all past all of them now, or in December. So this should be a completely clean bill of health if all of these things have been carried out.
That's correct. So just to flag, I had a conversation with the sponsor of the report, Andrew Brown, and we have also done the audit check on the recommendations. Although 2 were in December, we have completed that already, and the recommendations have all been implemented for this report.
That's really good to hear. Excellent. And I think it's a really sensible recommendation on that first one as well, just to have that double check in place. Any comments or questions on payroll? I think that report does a really good job of covering its bases there. Thank you very much for that. Engagement of agency staff, IR35 compliance.
Thank you, Chair. So IR35, there's been a bigger shift and focus on this area. And just to add a bit of context about that, that is where a person is employed on a contractual basis and their work, simplified, is not project-based. So the point of putting them inside IR35, it stops the employer, so the council in this case, from not paying national insurance, employers' national insurance, and those areas. We have reviewed the council's processes in place for it. Although we found there were some forms that were not completed, and we raised 3 high priority recommendations, we didn't find any non-compliance, i.e. there were people who work at the council who are contracted that should not be inside IR35. There is a risk that people who are outside IR35, where they are project-based work, should be inside IR35, but this audit report does not look at that area. Happy to take any questions on that.
Thank you. Yeah, I find it interesting that the top two were obviously taken on board really quick because they were completed by the time you updated your report, and then the remaining two should be done now also, like the previous appendix. So it seems here some of them are really quick wins that you're picking up in audit, and other things that obviously take a lot longer, which is the nature of it. There's lots of different areas. I've not really got any questions about this. I'll just open it up to members. Any comments or questions on this particular one? No? No? Okay, thank you. We're moving on to cyber security, please.
Thank you, Chair. Cybersecurity, something which has been in the public media quite evidently because of all the cyber attacks. Unfortunately, it's a very, very big area, very broad area, and it is affecting councils more frequently. The reality is that there are attempted attacks on councils consistently on a day-to-day basis, and that includes Thurrock Council, and most of these are always, they don't get through the first barrier, in essence, the first firewall, the first phase of protection. So I want this report to be taken as a high-level review only. We haven't looked at cybersecurity enough in the past, from my view, in the last 3 or 4 years. So this is the first stage of the first report that we are doing as part of our IT plan over the next 3 years. And on that, we haven't identified anything significant. Now, that doesn't mean that if there's a significantly well-planned attack that everything will be okay, but what it does mean is the specific areas we've looked at, we haven't found any key vulnerabilities. And the only final thing to point out is we asked a specialist IT auditor to look at this area because it's such a specialized area.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think some of it's ambitious some of the time on this. I think it's a lot of work to undertake and a lot of training, and it's a whole culture change. A lot of it when around cyber security. It's not just sending out someone a phishing test and ticking a box. You've got to really get everyone on board and make cyber security everyone's responsibility. Yeah, before I go to mine, any comments or questions on cyber security on this one? Okay, I'll go on to... So yeah, touching on that, we'll go to the training first. It's obviously due for February 26, and it says the phishing campaigns are now starting. It's going twice a year and that kind of thing. Yeah, I don't know if that's going to be... it feels like there should be more going on there. I'll just say that. It says that it should be mandatory yearly for all employees. Yeah, maybe even more so. And I know it says the previous leadership rejected cyber training, but things change, and things change so quickly around cyber that I just think that's worth reviewing a bit more regularly. Yeah, there's lots in it. I think it's a lot to do, and some of it's only got like 2 months left. So I don't know if we can have a written update on the progress on some of these areas that have been identified, just to see how on track they are with them, because when we come back, the deadlines would have gone and it would be too late to ask. Oh, Helen.
Thank you, Chair. I know the Chief Digital Officer wasn't able to attend this evening, but I have had a written update from her against each of those items in the internal audit report. So if there was any specifically that you'd like me to comment on, like the training that you've just referenced, then I can, of course, relay to you the information that's been provided to me. Obviously, if there's something that I can't answer, it not being my area, I'll take that away and can commit to report back.
Yeah, it sounds really useful. Thank you for that. That would be really good.
Would you like me to go through the list from
yes, please,
the top?
Yeah.
Yep, no, happy to do so. Just bear with me while So in terms of access management, so the levers process has been updated and associated process and workflows have been documented. The outstanding element is the supporting user access management policy, but that's in the process of being created. On vulnerability management, there have been discussions with a company called Bytes regarding funded workshops, and they're looking to book in the new year. And they're also looking at having a specifically qualified resource that will be provided to do high-level assessments. And in addition, and most importantly, on that funding has now been approved by SLT for procurement of a specific security service that will deliver proactive security monitoring. And there'll be dedicated roles in the IT restructure that was launched yesterday in order to specifically support that function. Daily security checks have been implemented. They have a disaster recovery test that's been scheduled to take place in the new year. Clearly, I'm not going to give specifics around dates because of the sensitivity of some of this information, but just to provide assurance that that is in train. Some of that training and awareness work has started, and phishing simulation campaigns with associated training have been launched. So the first phishing exercise commenced last week, which is a simulation exercise targeting 1,000 users. On the whole, there was significant compliance with that, in that people didn't access the links in the messages, but where users did interact with what could be potentially malicious links, they have been automatically enrolled into that cybersecurity training, and they'll now look at rolling that campaign out to the rest of the organisation as well. Yeah, and I think that should cover most of those recommendations from the report. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think that adds a lot to this and puts a lot of meat on the bone in terms of the content of this, and yeah, it gives me some reassurance that things have progressed. Yeah, that's the only downside of this. We're always retrospective and we're looking back from September and we're already sort of in December, but yeah, that's lots of good news there. Thank you for that, very useful. Any other comments and questions on the cybersecurity element? No, thank you for that then. Moving on to records management.
Thank you, Chair. So records management, a report we provided limited assurance on. It's in relation to the policies for, in essence, managing the records to comply with data protection. That's probably your key aspect of all of this. Appreciate there's been fundamental changes at the council. There's a SharePoint migration project going on. It's a very, very large project that needs to be completed. There has been delays in getting all the information across to it. However, there's complex legislation around it, GDPR rules, which are now quite clear. Management have fallen back on the project that they were trying to do. However, they are working towards new timelines. I will pause there and happy to take any questions, and appreciate this is the report which had the areas which management did not provide target dates or certain responses.
Thank you for that. And yeah, I don't know if it's just a coincidence, but this is some of the ones that I had so many questions on anyway, and we just happen to have no dates on a lot of it. I think that, again, I think we're not moving fast enough on some of these things. And I understand resources and things like that are tough, but yeah, it seems that when this report is done in September, it's very easy to say, oh, you'll have that done by next September, and put nothing in between. And there's no updates, there's no, stages of getting there. So I think we just need to see be asking for a lot more detail around some of these things that are got no date at all, or is it a full 12 months? I think then maybe we do need to make the areas, split it down into turn from one, SharePoint migration project to A, B, and C subsections of that, and then have, what's to be done next month, what's to be done in 3 months, 6 months, rather than us getting all the way to September next year and say, oh no, we're off track with it. And then it's too late, because then there'll be another report for the next 12 months out there. So, yeah, Helen, do you want to come in there?
Just again, Chair, that I have, in advance of this report being considered, certainly for some of those aspects that are owned by my colleague, the Chief Digital Officer, again, I do have updates, so particularly around the SharePoint migration project update, I could go through in more detail with that now if you would like me to. Thanks. So the revised project timelines were established based on availability of existing resource and have now successfully been met for all phases completed to date. So they had phase 4 regeneration that was occurring between September 25 and November 25. That's complete. Phase 5, which was the senior leadership and chief exec's office, that again took place between September 2025 and December 25. That is also complete. economic development, that's occurring between October 25 and December 25. That status is on track at the moment. Procurement was phase 6A. That was being migrated across from November 25 to December 25. The status on that is complete. And then in terms of phase 7 and phase 8, we have finance, which is going to go live January 26 to March 26. So it hasn't started as yet, but will obviously be started imminently in the new year. And then phase B, there is housing. There's a long period of time for this, probably due to the volume of records, so January 26 to June 26, but a 3-month contingency has also been built in for that, for automations, integrations and PowerShell migration as well, so that will be started in the new year.
Thank you. That answers, a lot of questions. I think that we should just ask for some, where we've not been provided dates, we'll just ask again, I think, as a committee, and try and get some numbers on those so we can see what we're aiming for. I think that'd be really useful. Going back to how we started the meeting talking about that, this is a really good example of why we need to see it, I believe. I just think it seems too easy just to say September 26. It's a date. It's 12 months away. It seems too convenient. So I'd like to see a bit more detail. But thank you for the update on the written response there. Any other comments or questions on this one? Councillor Arnold?
Yeah. Every single councillor, every single member of staff goes through data protection training, otherwise they can't even get on systems and start using them. So it really concerns me when I'm reading things that personal details are in a cabinet that won't lock and it's been turned around to face the wall so that you can't get in, and then you don't know how long the records have been in there or whose records are in there by the sounds of it. That we go on and it says again, inadequate training records provided, so we don't know if people are trained, what they're trained in, how they're being stored, whether they're being stored correctly, for how long. And then you rightly point out that there's no dedicated risk for record management and that we need one, and you can't get a response from management on doing that or not doing it. Sorry, but I'm pretty shocked. And if you're not getting responses here quickly or adequately enough, I don't know how you feel about this, but if that is something that we need to ask the chair here to take up and get them in front of us to discuss it further, then I think there's something we need to be doing to help you here.
Thank you. So I think in terms of the responses where we haven't received the target dates or responses that members are comfortable with, it would make sense for a request to be made so an update is provided to all members over what's happened, or if they are unable to implement that recommendation, because there are instances where that can happen, how have they considered the risk of what has been identified and how they're managing that risk as another way to progress and conclude on the recommendation. So it's up to members to decide how they feel appropriately to take that forward.
I think we need to invite them to the next audit committee. I think that's probably the next best thing. It's probably the one that's got the most questions that can't be easily answered. And because there is the dates that none of us were comfortable with at the start of the meeting, that's the one that hangs over this. So I think that's only right. We bring all this up at the next audit committee and invite the directorate over. Is the committee happy with that?
Yeah, happy with that, and for a more in-depth report from them to come to that meeting as well.
Yeah, have it as a written update at the next audit meeting. Councillor Raper?
Just to say that listening to the things that Marta's given to Helen, there are obviously things happening that we're not aware of because the dates were given for a year ahead and so on. So it probably will be far more positive than we think it might be, but it would be good to hear. So thank you. And do thank her for sending that through.
Any other comments or questions on this one? The recommendation as read is 2.1, review the findings and recommendations of each report with particular focus on management responses, including timelines, and ensure appropriate actions are placed for the corresponding recommendations. And what we would also like to recommend is that we invite the director responsible for this to come back to the next audit meeting to go through it in more detail.
Which directorate? So for the records management report, there'll be a few. So they're listed on. I would suggest we ask whoever is responsible for the recommendation to attend. That would probably make the most sense.
It's the appropriate officer. Is everyone happy with that recommendations? Is it agreed? To the contrary? Brilliant, thank you. That leads us on to item 9, the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, RIPA, Activity Report 2023-2024. I'd like to remind members that we do have an exempt appendix on pink paper on this report, and if we'd like to discuss the contents of that in more detail, those particular items, then please let me know beforehand, because it will mean we'll have to exclude the public and press and come out of the live session. So don't just ask the question, please let me know, and we'll go through the chair. Can I please ask Helen Nicholl to introduce this report?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. So this is your annual report around the use of powers conferred to the Council under the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, or RIPA, as it's known in short. And essentially this is around the use of covert surveillance. So there are occasions where under this legislation the Council can undertake covert surveillance, but they need to demonstrate that it's necessary and proportionate to the alleged crime, only used as a last resort, or if any other less intrusive means cannot be used, and only to be carried out if the potential crime or offence would result in a prison sentence of at least 6 months. This is a highly regulated area. We have a policy that is in place at the Council that has to be followed, and if these powers want to be utilised, there's a lengthy internal process that is undertaken whereby the investigating officer presents a report that then goes through an authorisation process and is also signed off by a senior responsible officer. But once that is done, it then has to go to the Magistrates' Court, and the use of the powers has to be signed off by a judge in the Magistrates' Court as well. So there is a significant process that has to be followed in accordance with the policy. The Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office is the relevant regulator for this area, and is responsible for the oversight of the use of covert surveillance by public authorities throughout the country. And it is a requirement of the regulator that we also report regularly to members on the activity and when these powers have been used. So this report is reporting to you activity for the period 2024 to 2025. That's the financial year. And you'll see there's a table in 3.7 of the report that sets out that over that period, the powers have been utilised on 4 different occasions. I note there is a typographical error in paragraph 3.7 where we said it was 5. Actually, the correct number is 4 per the table, and also the comparison against the previous year. So actually, there's been 1 further use of the powers since in comparison to the previous year, but actually use of those powers is still relatively low. The circumstances in which the Council is using them is in relation to trading standards, and it is the use generally of volunteers who are usually either under 18 or under 25, essentially going mainly into shop premises in order to ensure that either they're not being sold prohibited goods, they shouldn't due to their age, or that there is the appropriate check and challenge, the Challenge 25 process is undertaken. For the first time this year, we have included within Appendix 2 some details of those circumstances in which those powers have been utilised. I don't think that we have historically provided this information to this committee, but it was considered that it would be useful to provide some detail to give members some context. That is, of course, in exempt papers, the reason being that obviously there are establishments that are named within those documents, and there is no findings as to the outcomes of when those investigations were undertaken, whether there was any offence committed or not. So it was thought prudent, given the commercial sensitivity of that information, that it should remain in exempt papers, but hopefully provide some context. So in terms of what this report is asking you to do, it's really to note and provide comment on the use of RIPA powers for the period of the report. And also, just in relation to the policy that is found at Appendix 1, the substantive contents of the policy we're recommending remain as they are, but there are some minor changes required, particularly in relation to the authorising officer information that is in the policy at, I think it is Appendix 2 of that policy on page 309. And so we're just requesting that you authorise us to make any relevant updates to those officers, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Fabulous, thank you for that, Helen. I think the version control sheet's really useful as well in here, just to see where it has been updated over time. And yeah, it does obviously, as and when legislation changes. Any comments or questions from members on this report? Councillor Raper.
Just a comment, really. The pink papers, I'm not asking questions on them, but I found them very useful because I was on audit committee, well, standards and audit some time ago, and we didn't get this. So it certainly lets us understand the work that is being done out there. So that's very good. And the other little point, whilst I'm speaking, is all the way through this document, we've got glossaries included, which are very useful. It stops me asking some of my ridiculous questions because it's there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I agree with that. It makes it a lot easier, doesn't it? Absolutely. It is good to see real-life examples as well, because I know this comes every year to Audit Committee, and it's to see behind the scenes a little bit more what these powers mean on the ground, so to speak. And I think it's good that they are used so sparingly. We never want to be overbearing with these things, but it's also important for the safety of making sure underage children are not buying alcohol and tobacco and things like that. Can see why these things are done and why these powers are available. And it is good that we only have to use them a handful of times each year. So that's encouraging to see. Any other comments or questions on this particular report from members? No? Yeah, thank you for that. I think the report answers a lot of its own questions, which is always good. We have some recommendations. Recommendations 1.1, note and provide any comment on the use of RIPA powers for the period 1st of April 2024 to the 31st of March 2025. And 1.2, agreed that the RIPA policy RIPA is to remain as attached as Appendix 1, save for the amendment to authority officer information as set out in paragraph 3.5 of this report. Are we all agreed on those? Any to the contrary? Thank you. Moving on to item 10, which is our last item for the meeting, which is the work programme. Does any member wish to comment on the work programme? I mean, looking at it, I know we've had some bits deferred and we've got what looks like a big agenda in March 2026, which seems like a long way off, but Blinken will be there. Yeah, there's a lot going on there. I'd like to have put something in there particularly, but I just don't think I think it's going to be too busy as it is. It's 3 or 4 items more than I've had this evening, and that's going to go quite a long meeting in March, I suspect. Has anyone got any comments or questions related to the work programme? Councillor Raper?
I hate to ask this question, but do we need an extraordinary meeting if we've got so many things we want to include? Yeah.
But I think a lot of these are because they are going to be working up until March, and then we could be in Purda after that. So it's going to be hard to have an extraordinary meeting. But if we're not in Purda for any particular reason, who knows what's changed between now and March, then yeah, perhaps we could look into that, and we'll have to play it by ear, I see, and I guess we'll know in January how things are going in that respect. So yeah, any other comments or questions on this, on the work programme? No? Brilliant, thank you very much, everyone. That concludes the business of the meeting. I now declare the meeting closed at 20:48 p.m. Thank you.